Thank you very much. We're at item 3A. This is a public hearing, and I will open our public hearing. The governing board will convene I don't have to read that. We will now convene a public hearing to receive public testimony concerning proposed trustee voting area plans associated with the district's transition to a by-trustee area election system. Under California Elections Code, Section 10010, the board must hold at least 2 public hearings prior to holding a public hearing to adopt a final trustee voting area plan. We are going to have a short presentation prior to taking public comments. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Connolly, trustees, Dr. McLaughlin, staff. I'm Jonathan Salt, and I'm sure you know me plenty well by now, along with Larry Furchow of Cooperative Strategies. This is our second of 3 public hearings regarding the map options, 4th of 5 total public hearings, and we've incorporated some changes after the last meeting as well. So I'll hand it off to Larry to explain where we are in the process. Right now we are, like I actually mentioned where we were, so I'll just hand it off to Larry about the maps, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, members of the board. Larry Furchow again. I'm tempted to turn it over to Mr. Lichtel for this part of the presentation since he's done this now. All right, I tried. So we have these trustee area plans that we've discussed 2 weeks ago and received some comments and some responses to those. But again, just a brief overview. The maps are drawn to comply with both federal and state law in terms of roughly equal population, compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act in terms of ensuring that members of protected classes are not inhibited from influencing elections through this process. The areas have to be contiguous. They have to be as compact as possible. We have to look at communities of interest. We are allowed to consider incumbency, but it can't be a primary consideration. We've shared these demographic numbers before in terms of the table on the left-hand side being the census from 2010 in terms of total population and population 18 and over. So we see 135,000 total residents as of 2010 with 5 roughly equal areas of 27,000 people, plus or minus 2,700 between the largest and smallest. We can see on the table on the right our citizen voting age population. This is an estimate of those who are 18 and over and have citizenship status, so would be eligible to register to vote. What we want to highlight here is our protected classes under the Federal Voting Rights Act, Hispanic Latino being the largest at just under 12%, Asian American being the second largest at 7.25%, and African American just under 1%. Shared this map before. This is not the weather map again. This is the density of population based on census blocks. The darker the color, the more people are crammed into those little areas. We've got 3 maps that were previously published on January 15th that are under consideration by the board and were talked about thoroughly 2 weeks ago. So I'll put those up, and John wants to talk about one thing on them before I get too deep into the discussion.
Thanks. So on each map option, you'll notice in the sort of top left there's a legend or a key, and next to each trustee area there is a year that either says 2020 or 2022. On some maps, just given of how the map ended up being drawn, there's only one option for that year, for that map. For example, and we'll get back to this in a moment, map 3, for example, given where the current trustees live, Area 5 and Area 1 would be open for election in 2020. There's really no way to change that at all. But looking at a couple of the other maps, like Scenario 1, for example, there are 3 areas that could be up for election in 2020, areas 1, 4, and 5, because there are no incumbents with term beyond 2020 in those areas. So the board is supposed to contemplate that, and ultimately will make a decision on which areas will be up for election at the next meeting, along with which map it's going to go with. And so one of the interesting things under the CVRA is the district's supposed to consider the purpose of the CVRA. And here on this map, for example, in Area 1, 4, and 5, there's not there's, Area 4, for example, has a large minority population of the Hispanic population. There's also increased African American and Asian. Similarly, in Area 5, the Asian population is increased, and in Area 1, the African American population is increased. The numbers are not so different that there isn't necessarily one that we strongly recommend one or the other be available next, so it'll ultimately be a board decision, but that's why on this map it has several different sequencing scenarios, having 2 of the 3 available in the next election.
All right, so back to just the layout of the maps. Again, Area 1 is yellow, 2 is green, 3 is red, 4 is blue, and 5 is purple. So you can kind of get a sense of the lay of the land, if you will. Area 1 starting the Lake Sherwood area, moving over to the Westlake area. Area 2 starting above that and kind of coming over the 23 to the other side. Kind of wrapping around or hugging Area 3 down there in the middle, being a variation of what we'll be calling an inverted T along the up the north of the 23 and along the 101. Areas 4 and 5 kind of dividing up the Newbury Park, with Area 5 being mostly Newbury Park and Area 4 being a little bit of Newbury Park and some of Thousand Oaks area. You can see the population statistics at the bottom. So we see our population variance is about 5.25%. You can see the demographics here. We've highlighted with those green circles or ovals, areas where members of protected classes have a larger influence, in particular areas above the district average. So if you remember, it was 11, almost 12% Latino across the district, but Area 3 gets to 19.44%, Area 4 at 13.13%. The Asian American percentages were about 7.75% district-wide, 7.25%, sorry. But we see areas 2, 4, and 5 with a percentage point or more greater than the district average. Something that was asked about at the last board meeting, and I think also spoken about during the district advisory committee discussion, was information on household income. So this is information from the American Community Survey that we've gathered and provided on all the scenarios. What I find is helpful is kind of looking at that $0 to $75,000 a year household income, and then $75,000 and above. What you can see is areas 1, 2, 4, and 5 are all in the mid 60% for household income at 75 or greater, and Area 3, again that central area, is about 47% in household income greater than 75,000. So you can see there's a concentration there of more modest socioeconomics in Area 3 as opposed to the 4 other areas. And you'll see that throughout the scenarios in Area 3 having a varying degree of concentration of that particular percentage. So that, again, if it's not already, it should be on all the scenarios on the district's website. Scenario 2, just kind of going through them real fast. Very similar layout, just a little bit of a difference in the division of the Newbury Park area, for example, where Area 4 does cross the 101. You'll see that Area 3 doesn't go quite as far north in this particular scenario and spreads out a little bit wider, but otherwise very similar. Area 2 doesn't come across as far to the east as it did in Scenario 1 either. Again, percentage-wise, we have 2 areas of increased influence in Areas 3 and 4 for the Latino community, and 2, 3 areas of increased influence for the Asian American community in Areas 2, 4, and 5. Similarly, on the socioeconomic information, we see Areas 1, 2, 4, and 5 in the high 60s to low 70s in terms of household income above 75,000. And then Area 3 at 49%. So again, another concentration of households with income below 75,000 in Area 3. Yes, 3. Too many numbers at this point. So we have Scenario 3 here. And again, we've talked about that inverted T at the first scenario, and this is probably the most evident of what that inverted T and how that line goes across the 101 freeway there. You can see what that does is it shifts Area 1 farther to the west, and less of the Westlake communities included there. Area 2 stays, for the most part, to the east of the 23, just coming across a little bit north of Area 3. And then Area 4 stays to the north of the 101. In terms of percentages in terms of ethnicities. We see that the Latino community gets up to 22% on citizen voting age population, which puts it at its highest. But it does pretty well concentrated in that one particular area, so we don't see a large percentage in any of the others. It's just one larger concentration of that community there. Same kind of concentrations of the Asian American community at about 1 percentage point above the district average. And then finally, can't do math in my head, so I need my notes here. The percentage at 75,000 or greater in Area 3 is at 44%. So we've seen kind of low to mid 40s in terms of household income, above 75,000 in Area 3, and again in the mid 60s to higher or mid 70s percentage-wise for the others above 75,000 annual household income. So that's kind of the scenarios we shared. Some of the discussion obviously led to the inclusion of the socioeconomic information. We also were presented with 2 maps that were developed by the community, 2A as it was named by the community, and then 3B as it was named by the community. We'll just call it 3A to confuse you, but that 3A is what the community prepared. 3B is a variation of scenario 3 that was based on board member feedback on some of the desires to look at what it would look like if we made some changes to the maps that we'll talk about. So these maps are for information and discussion. The other 3 maps are currently under consideration as we have those 2 different categories. But certainly if any or all of these maps are maps that the district would like or the board would like to have as under consideration, we'd welcome that direction and would then so designate those maps as being under consideration and therefore available for the board to take action on in 2 weeks when the board is scheduled to do that. So as part of the discussion after the public hearing, if the board would like any or all of those to be moved over to the other column, that would be helpful to know so we can have those ready for the meeting in 2 weeks from now. So this is the community scenario 2A. It's a variation on scenario 2, and it makes some fairly modest modifications to it, moving area 4 to the east a little bit, and area 4 to the east, area 2 to the west. Got my directions right so far. And really that's about the only changes it makes in the communities. Area 3 remains the same, so you can see the same type of population demographics there, 18.73% Latino, 12.49% in Area 4, similar number of Asian American, just 2 areas of increased influence in areas 4 and 5. Again, those would be the blue and the purple areas. So that is scenario 2A. What didn't make the presentation that I wrote down, just to highlight, is the income information. And so Area 3, again, is at 47% of households above 75,000, so 53% below 75,000, and the other 4 areas are in that high 60 to low 70% above 75,000. So again, keeping that concentrated area of income there. This is scenario 3A. Again, this was the community's 3B. I will highlight there's one difference, and hopefully this mouse will work. If you look right here, in the community scenario, this was cut off in a straight line, and I would love to do that, but as we talked about, we have these Lego blocks that we have to deal with. And this particular Lego block, hopefully I don't own any royalties to Lego for this, using their trademark here. But this one comes from this particular area. Hopefully you can see the mouse there. And it kind of comes all the way around, my jittery hands, all the way up around here. And so it grabs houses all along the backside of that community and from there. And there's about just under 1,000 residents in that particular census block. And we're not supposed to break census blocks, especially census blocks that contain population, because we don't know how many people are on each side of whatever line we create. So that particular census block provides some challenges for us, so we were not able to make that a nice clean line there. But otherwise, this is the scenario as was submitted by the community at the last board meeting. So you can see, again, similar to scenario 3, area 3 goes below the 101 in this particular scenario. and Area 2 in green comes over and down the 23, where it doesn't in the previous scenario, and Area 5 comes across Lynn Road more than it does in Scenario 3 as well. So those are some of the changes. In terms of demographics, we see 21.4% Latino in Area 3, and we see 2 areas of increased Asian American influence in Areas 4 and 5 at a percentage point or 2 above the district average. And my numbers are, in terms of household income, Area 3 at 46% above the $75,000 annual household income. So very similar. I think we're seeing pretty similar numbers across all these in the mid to low 40%. Finally, Scenario 3B. The request from the board was to look at what would it take to, since we had this Area 3 that stretches along the 101 freeway, to try to incorporate as much of the Latino citizen voting age population as possible into one trustee area. What would it look like to reach Las Casitas neighborhood here, where the arrow is pointing? I can assure you, I know I said the areas had to be contiguous, and I can assure you we run that area along the 101 freeway. There are some census blocks there that do connect it, however, tenuously, but it is connected there. The other request was to see if we can connect the 2 higher areas of Asian American citizen voting age population, the one area being over here, in and around the Sycamore Canyon, and the other area being this area right here where the mouse is floating over. And so it was bringing those 2 areas together to try to increase the Asian American percentage on citizen voting age population above what we had been seeing in the other scenarios. So with that, you can see we get in Area 3 about a percentage point more than what we had seen in some of the other scenarios, at least at the high watermark of Scenario 3 for Latino citizen voting age population. The Las Casitas neighborhood has a high population, so it's a large number that we're including, but the citizen voting age population of the Latino community is a little bit lower there than in some of the other parts of the areas of Scenario 3 or Area 3. So it doesn't really pack a lot of punch, if you will, to increase that number much. It's just a small number of citizen voting age population, a very large number of population overall. So that's why you see not a whole lot of difference there. But it is, something that we tried and for your consideration. The other is you see the Asian American population number in Area 5 goes to 11.75%. Again, reminder that the district number is about 7.25. Most of the other scenarios had it at about 8 and 8.5, 8.75. So this does get us another 3 percentage points above some of the other scenarios and putting it into one area. But there are some features of it that, from a looks perspective, may give some people pause, and that's for the public feedback and board feedback as well. But we wanted to make sure that you had a view of what that looks like. The one feature of this map that I like is that it does push Area 2 to be entirely to the east side of the 23. Aesthetically, that looks nice. It doesn't have that wrap over feature that we've seen in some of the other scenarios. So if you just focus on that and avoid what's happening on the west side, then maybe that will assuage your aesthetic concerns there. So with that, I think just a reminder of the schedule. This is our second post-map public hearing, and in 2 weeks' time, we'll have the third and scheduled final post-map public hearing, at which point the board could consider selecting one of these maps and moving the process forward. I think, John, you wanted to take over from there and talk about how that process might work.
Yes. Just as a reminder, these maps don't change where anyone's children go to school. It doesn't change how the district is governed. In terms of how next week will work, there will be 2 agenda items. The first will be a public hearing exactly like this one, At the end of that, there will be a different action item where the board will consider a resolution to formally adopt one of the map options. And so what will happen is I will hand out a script with a lot of blanks on it. So anyone on the board can make a motion. So I move to adopt resolution number 18/19, whatever the number is, whatever the resolution says, with map scenario, I'll just pick a number that's not one of them, with map scenario 10. And then with trustee areas 1 and 2 for 2020 and 3, 4, 5 in 2022. And then there can be a second. There can be discussion. Eventually, if there's a vote of 3 or more, that's the map. If not, we keep going until we eventually get to a map that is adopted. So there can be discussion, obviously, before any motion is made to talk about what folks like or don't like about the maps or general thoughts. So that's the way it'll work next week. And with that, the purpose of this public hearing, again, is for folks to comment on what they like or don't like about the maps, to give the board feedback and some direction of what the community thinks about the maps, and particularly which ones they like best, since the board will be voting on it next week. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have public comments? How many? 7. We have 7 public comments. As part of this public hearing, members of the public may submit comments on the establishment of voting area boundaries for the new trustee voting areas that will be established as part of the district's transition from an at-large election system to a by-trustee election system. Speakers will be given 3 minutes to make comments on this matter, and this matter only. We have received cards from 7 people who wish to address this subject during the public hearing. The first up to the mic is Jeannie Iverson, second Marianne Van Zyl.
Good evening. Can you hear me? I would like to cede my time to Marianne Van Zyl, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have
Jeannie.
6 minutes.
And I'm not going to take all 6 minutes. I just needed a little security blanket. My name, again, is Marianne Van Zyl. I just wanted to express my personal opinion about some of these maps. The first comment I have is about map 3B that has the the dense Hispanic communities connected by a census block that is basically the freeway. And the appearance there is that we are drawing a district in a way that looks like a salamander, in a way that is unnatural. And when it comes to actually looking at gerrymandering, one way to reduce the voting power of a particular population is to pack as many of those people into a district, or in this case, a trustee area, as possible. One of the things that I would like to say about all of the other maps is that area of Las Casitas and the apartments that exist between Hillcrest and the 101 just south of Amgen, in terms of raw population, that area has 15%, will be 15% of any district that it's in. So if, for instance, in the other scenarios, it is in District 4, Trustee Area 4, that's a concentration of Latino voters who, if a candidate wants to win in that area, they have to campaign in that area because 15% of the people live in that area. And whether they are all voters or not, they will have influence on the voters who do vote there. And so I think that even though it falls not in the central red district, the Las Casitas and an apartment complex there bring power to a second district in terms, trustee area, in terms of having a trustee needing to address the needs of Latino students, because there's such a dense population in that district. One of the things that I like about MAP 3A submitted by the community and that Jenny Kreitman presented at the last hearing is that it does spread out the schools among the districts so that they are more evenly distributed. I keep saying districts, and my apologies, the trustee area. And while it's not one of the criteria, I think that is a valuable thing to consider. And I want to make sure that I've covered all of my notes. One of the other reasons that I particularly don't like MAP 3B is that it does not maintain the community of interest in terms of that area that is south of the 101, where Lynn Road meets the 101, and then building to the west, because that is an area where students go to either Newbury Park High School or Thousand Oaks High School, and the associated, they commute up to Acacia or all the way over to Banyan, and they are put in a trustee area with Westlake High School and not their own high school of residence. Those are the points that I would like to make tonight. I hope that you will consider adding MAP 3A to be a map that is under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Aaron Woolley, followed by Carolyn Clark.
Good evening to all. At the last board meeting, both the superintendent and Betsy Connolly mentioned that there were maps distributed in closed session. Those maps were never made public. This seems very suspicious. Isn't it supposed to be a transparent process? Those original maps should have been made public immediately. How else can the public know in what ways the board has politically influenced what was supposed to be a scientific process? This issue is going to be voted on in the next board meeting. And will you make those original maps available to us so we can be to the public, so we can know what the boundaries were supposed to look like before the gerrymandering began? This whole process has been very suspicious. The taxpayers and the parents of Conejo Valley deserved a lot better than to be treated this way. Thank you.
Carolyn Clark, and after that, Leslie Kay.
Dr. Connolly, Dr. McLaughlin, and trustees, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I, too, attended your last board meeting when Dr. McLaughlin said maps had been shown in closed session. I want to see those maps, and the public needs to see those maps. Otherwise, it looks like you're hiding them. These maps are not confidential because confidential items are disciplinary actions regarding teachers or students, according to the Brown Act. Dr. McLaughlin promised us he would be sharing all maps, and I look forward to him keeping that promise. Thank you.
Good evening, board members and district staff. Some of what I have to say will mirror the sentiments of Mr. Woolley. It was my understanding that the proposed maps were to be released to the public in the interest of transparency and a desire to involve the community in the process. During the last board meeting, the demographers were asked if the board had opportunity to view other maps. Their response was, I don't know. That's a bit concerning to me, but it was actually Dr. McLaughlin's response that's more of a cause of concern for me. when a board member asked about having an opportunity to see other maps, I believe Dr. McLaughlin responded, just the ones in closed session prior to the last board meeting. That was it. I'm wondering why proposed maps were being viewed and discussed in closed session if the intention of this process is to ensure transparency and involve the community. I'm wondering why viewing and discussion of proposed trustee maps didn't appear on the closed session agenda. I'm wondering if viewing and discussion of the proposed by trustee area maps in a closed session could be a violation of the Brown Act. Perhaps Trustee Fitzgerald could advise us, as she's a practicing attorney. I'm wondering if the proposed by trustee area maps that Dr. McLaughlin indicated were viewed during the closed session of the prior board meeting look the same as the maps that were released to the public, or if they look different. So basically, I'm wondering if the public is seeing trustee area maps that may have been altered or influenced based on input from either district staff or board members, which is concerning from a gerrymandering standpoint. It's not seeming to me that this process has been very transparent or had the intention to really involve the community in the process, and it seems like something the district could get sued for. And I'm concerned about that. In the interest of transparency, I would like, or I'd hope that these questions could be answered tonight. Number one, are the maps released to the public the exact same maps that Dr. McLaughlin indicated that the board viewed in closed session prior to public release? And number two, may we please see those other maps? Thank you.
Next up is Emily Gonzalez, followed by Linda Carl.
Hi, Emily Gonzalez, longtime parent of CVUSD kids, 3. Now, watching the maps, I see them explain the different ways that they want to divide them up, but a lot of people in this community are like me. My husband is Mexican. I'm white. So our kids are half, I guess, essentially. So how do they identify? Because I don't even remember what I said on the 2010 census, to be honest with you. So if we're grouping people based on race, like, where do my kids fit? Because they're half. And the other thing, as far as getting the community involved in these maps, now for years, every time there is a cafeteria menu item change, band practice has changed, I get an all call. I get one from the district, I get one from all the schools. I mean, there is a never-ending barrage of calls for every single conceivable reason. I have received no literature from school about this. I've received no calls about this from school, no emails, nothing. Maybe one from the district, but by and large, the information hasn't really been put out there. And what scares me is also, if there were maps that were shown in private session, like, I want to see those, because we have a BOE now, a new one, that they ran on the ticket of bringing integrity back to the board. And I think part of that integrity is showing everybody everything that you've got, that we all get to see it, because I have a vested interest in this. I have a child, one left. And to be honest with you, I thought I could skate out these last 4 years, but that's not the case, and it wouldn't be fair to him anyway. So I would like to see the maps. I don't want us getting another Brown Act violation. I don't want us getting sued. I don't want this all coming. I know you guys are forced to do this, but let's all just do this together, so I don't have to keep coming up here, because I want to be home. I want to have a glass of wine. I'm sure you do too. So thank you.
Linda Carl.
Good evening, Dr. Connolly, Superintendent McLaughlin, distinguished members of the board, district employees, fellow citizens. My name is Linda Carl. I am a co-vice president of the community group Adelante, and we did, a couple of the community members in our group got together and had the opportunity to review the maps that were published, along with the agenda items, or there was a publication in the newspaper as well, and we reviewed the different maps. And based on the different scenarios that were presented here at the previous board meeting, and along with the different scenarios that were provided on the online web link, we had the opportunity to see them, and there were a couple of features on the different maps that we found were more aligned with the intention of the distribution of the district in the different areas. And the one that we found was more addressing the intention of better serving the different protected populations was the scenario 3A. We also considered the scenario 3B, but the fact that that area of Las Casitas was brought together, which to us seemed almost as in a forced way, that was the impression that we perceived. We felt that it was almost as trying to push it out of that purpley area that was there. So we would like to respectfully request that perhaps the board consider the scenario 3A as one of the maps that may be put for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. That ends the public comments. So, but I think I'm going to leave the hearing open right now to allow us some flexibility and ask Mr. Salt if he would come back up to the podium and take an opportunity to address the concerns raised by some members of the community about the decision to, at the very beginning of our process, discuss the initial proposed maps and the possibility of litigation against the district, and why those concerns were discussed in closed session?
Sure, and without getting into anything that happened in a closed session, the Brown Act provides that there's a handful of scenarios where a school board or legislative body can have a closed session meeting. And while some of those include teacher discipline and things of that nature, litigation and anticipated litigation is a proper closed session Brown Act category. Since the district was threatened with a lawsuit, the district is able to discuss items related to that potential lawsuit in closed session. Closed session discussions are confidential, and it's the board's sort of authority to waive that. It's not my place to say what did or didn't happen in closed session because it is confidential. So I guess on that note, a board can meet in closed session to discuss things related to anticipated litigation.
Thank you for that clarification. We've heard the public comments, so I'm now closing the hearing and opening this for board input. Mrs. Fitzgerald, followed by Mr. Gorbach, and then I think I saw Mrs. Everett's light maybe on as well.
First, thank you for the Google versions of the maps. I personally found those extremely helpful because when you go, it took me a minute to figure out how they worked, but you can go on and see the streets' names, and it's much easier to follow, I think, where the lines are drawn, so that was extremely helpful. Secondly, I understand the concerns about feeling like there were maps that are being hidden. And I think that that is going to derail this process for unnecessary reasons. They were discussed based on the explanation that was provided. I'd like to know if as a board we can agree to put out the original versions of the maps. I think that in doing so, it would address a lot of these concerns without it actually being a problem, and our community would be able to see that there was no malintent there to hide anything, but I can see why that would be a concern for some in not seeing those maps. So I'd like us to be able to discuss, one, if we're able to do that, and two, if that's something as a board we're willing to do so that we can put it out there and get feedback and move on in a way that feels collaborative and transparent, because that is something I feel as a board we should be doing.
So let me, before we take anything else, if I believe, and I'm hoping you're going to correct me as legal counsel if I'm wrong, that the board can release information from closed session if we agree to do so. What I don't know is whether we have to vote in closed session to release that information, and if so, we could return to closed session at the end of our meeting tonight and do that. So I'm asking your advice on how we would go about making a decision to release the original maps that were shown to us in closed session.
Out of an abundance of caution, I would recommend closed session. However, it needs to be an agenda item. Many boards put items on the agenda every week just in case. So if there is, I haven't looked at the agenda, an anticipated litigation in one case on there, it could be discussed. We could also discuss having a special meeting shortly in the next couple of days so that this could be an item that's discussed in closed session and voted on. Or potentially before the next meeting, in which case things could be ready to go to be shown prior to the voting.
Okay, so we, it is not on the agenda as a whole, as a placeholder, where we don't normally leave items on as placeholders. So, but we do have a meeting next week for board priorities setting, and I think we could find a spot in that meeting so we could go ahead and vote on the 12th, and then be prepared to release those early, I'm hoping you have them, those early maps, and just post them up there as the initial process before we ever began the hearing process, if memory serves.
Okay.
Dr. Connolly?
Yes.
So along those lines, I'm not sure what we could say, but would any discussion from that closed session or any changes in who made them and why from that session be also made public?
Well, what do you have some advice you want to offer there?
I was going to say it would depend on what the board decided to waive the confidentiality on.
Exactly, and because we don't have minutes of closed session, I think that would be a pretty difficult process to do. But that is a topic for closed session to discuss what elements would be waived. Thank you for the advice. Mr. Gorbach.
Two questions. At the end again, and I know you've done this a zillion times, but I'm going to ask again. If we don't approve at our February 20, today's the 5th?
19th.
February 19th meeting, how close are we to the timeline? I mean, can we, is that it, one day? Is that what I hear?
We are at the end of the 90-day safe harbor period. I suppose there's an argument that, the district has substantially complied, but we recommend, hopefully, that there's a map that's agreeable at the next meeting.
Okay, and now a geographic question.
Yes.
And I'm going to work with rectangles here, although they're not. The rectangle in Area 3 that's bordered by Moore Park at the very top. Yeah, that one. Is it possible, I mean, how would it affect, I guess I'm asking, all the population questions, the protected population and the overall project, if that area was left in area, I can't tell what green is right now. 2. If that was left in area 2, the, what do I want to say? Oops.
I was just looking to see, and I think it's in area 2 and I think one of the maps.
Okay, but I have a couple
sorry.
questions, and I want to do 3A because that's the one I'm most interested in.
3A?
Okay, so if we took that top so-called rectangle between Arbolez and Flores, or Arbolez and Jance, I think it is.
No.
No, Arbolez and Flores.
Yeah.
And 23 and Moore Park, and put that, and made that green, made that area 2, and then took the area between Moore Park and Lynn and Flores and Jance, and made that area 3. How, that's part of my question. I have another part later, but can we say, you know what I'm saying? Because I like rounded things instead of gerrymandered points that go up.
So let me make sure I'm getting this. So you're saying to bring green down to where Century Academy is written right here.
Right.
And to take in something here.
Well, no, the other area was, yeah, right there.
So that would, it would decrease our Latino concentration in area
I don't want to do that.
3 on citizen voting age population by a little bit, because this area tends a little less Latino concentration on citizen voting age population than this community here. So it would be a slight difference. I can't off the top of my head tell you is it 2%, 1%, 10%. But it would be some amount of difference.
And my other comment is, and obviously, I just campaigned. I campaigned around Lang Ranch, and there was no question in my mind when I was walking those streets that was Westlake. And so I'm wondering if, because in the scenario I just proposed, making an area extra green, to take Lang Ranch and make it area yellow, area 1. Because to me that's a common interest level, economic level, et cetera, to Westlake, which is mostly area 1.
So the challenge we run into there is what parts of area 1 as it exists now do we take out? So whenever you give, you got to take. So if we kind of follow that, if we draw area 2 down or push area 1 up to where Lang Ranch is, then we've got to lose population somewhere else. So some areas might be here. There's not anybody here. So then we're talking about there.
Well, I was thinking more like the main part of area 1, move it to the 23, and that prong of 2 that goes down.
So moving area 1 again, moving that this way, right?
Well, further south, but yeah.
So all along the 23? Moving area 1 all along the 23? I'm just trying to...
Yeah, I know, so am I. Okay, I'm just making suggestions or thoughts.
Yeah, as we're drawing these maps, there's lots of... Because there's so many competing interests.
That's the whole point.
It just becomes impossible to kind of check all of the boxes that we'd like to check. But it's just where people are presents some challenges here. But I mean, you can see in 3B again for other things on that side, but that does show you one way that the Lang Ranch community can be combined with most of the Westlake community. Again, you also have Westlake community that's separated into what is Area 1 in this particular scenario as well. So it achieves some things that may be desirable, but other things less so when we talk about the Area 3 section. So I don't know if that's direction is we like what Area 2 is in this scenario?
Well, again, I don't particularly care for this map because the only connection that's only contiguous is people living on the freeway.
Sure. So I guess the question would be is, as we look through the menus of options, is there something about this scenario, as we may not like stuff happening along the freeway, do we like what's happening on the east side of the 23, and we want to see if that element of scenario 3B could be replicated with something else
Yeah.
on the western side. I guess that's the
I'm
kind
just,
of direction.
again, we don't talk personally. I want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm just bringing out my thoughts publicly in front of everybody on TV and everything.
Are you done with that
I'm done with-
process,
yeah.
Bill? Why don't you turn your light off then? Mrs. Everett.
Okay, I have a couple of things. So I was a little confused by Mrs. Van Zyle's point that she was saying that somehow if we try to put a concentration of the Latino population into one district or one voting block or voting area, if we try to do that, that somehow that waters down their ability to impact the other districts. Because what's the other areas? Sorry. What's the purpose of this process if we're not trying to find a concentration of the more at-risk populations or the populations that would benefit from having a trustee that they can have the biggest influence on, or that they can make sure that a trustee they like gets on the board that will meet what they would like to see happening in the district. So I thought that comment was confusing, because if we were to do that, then we could just leave it the way it is, because we therefore have everyone spread out and everyone has an equal say, and all populations influence all trustees equally, pretty much. So because we all vote for all five of us. So that comment was confusing. And then when you were talking about the two maps, and you said that they were community maps, there was only one person that presented it, and I believe it was Mrs. Van Zyle's friend who presented it, because I think she handed you the maps back when she finished. But it was not they are not community maps. They are one person's request, I would say, because there's a lot more people in the community than just a couple of people that have attended the meetings. But I'm not saying I don't like the maps or anything like that, but I thought that was a misrepresentation of two of the maps to say that they were community maps. Let's see. And then, but I think that the little arm that goes off to the right of the red district or the red area looks equally as gerrymandered as the one that goes off to the left. So if you're going to fix one or the other, I don't know that we want to. I don't know that we want to tamper too much with it to say if we're going to have it stretch out on some end that it's going to therefore be gerrymandered, then we're going to have to capture something in between them so that they look more like a solid block. So I don't know if you took some out from the left and put it in with the right side to make it look more round or whatever. But if people are saying that it looks gerrymandered to have it go up and down the 101 freeway in order to capture a larger percentage of that population, which I thought was the purpose. That was why why I gave that suggestion. I thought that would give them more power and more voice in the election process. But if that's what I thought this purpose was. But I didn't actually intend, at least it wasn't my intention, that was all in the same map. That I thought you were going to do two separate maps that kind of put the Asian population so we could see what happened when you put those two together, and then put the Latino population, because the variance was so large and the population was so small in the third district that it sort of rendered it impossible for us to vote for without having them be at a disadvantage because of the lower numbers. I think it was like a 21% variance, which I'm not sure why that wasn't corrected, but do you, on the map 3B?
Yeah. And I'm writing down the points here so I can make sure I can try to to address them all. Maybe the easiest ones first in terms of the designation of it as a community map. It really just means it was submitted by a member of the community as opposed to provided by the district's demographic team, if you will. It wasn't meant to insinuate that the entire community came together and created the map. It really was just a community map. So that's one thing there. The variance question, I think what you're referring to is the variance on citizen voting age population. So on citizen voting age population, we are going to have some very large variances. It's really on total population that we need to be at that 10% or less, or fewer, or less, in this case, my grammar days. 10% or less in terms of variance. On citizen voting age population, it is going to vary more widely because, number one, that data is different. It's newer data, but we also know there are communities that skew younger, communities that skew older, communities that skew with higher and lower citizenship status, and so that's going to cause the variances to be much greater. So as you see in scenario 3B, we see what would actually be 34% variance if we were looking at trying to match it up by citizen voting age population. If we were to line it up on citizen voting age population, the total population variance would be way off. So we have to do it based on total population under the law and case law and that sort of thing. And I think the next maybe discussion that may help the process is the concepts of cracking and packing. And these sounds like eggs and things you do before you move. But really, it's just terms of how you treat populations through this districting process. Cracking is actually the easier one to understand. It would be as if we have a community of protected class right in the center of the district, and we divided it in fifths. We just had a big pizza-looking district, and the middle gets divided among the five. So we have our strong Latino or Asian American or African American or whatever protected class we might be discussing. That would be a viable area to keep together, but we've divided it up into 5 different areas to dilute their voting strength so that they would have had a good voting strength in 1 or 2 areas, but we've taken it down to very little in any area. So that's the easier one to understand. That's cracking. Packing deals with where you may have multiple areas, multiple communities across a district that are larger protected classes, and lumping them together in ways that don't make as much sense. And so I think if this scenario, if we didn't have to use the 101 freeway, then and we didn't have census blocks the way they were, then maybe this particular scenario is a little less packing than it appears. But because we have to do that, it gives the slight appearance, or maybe the appearance, that would be up to somebody in a robe to decide, of a racially influenced decision to put these areas together. I think when you have to do something that skinny along the freeway, that's where it raises concerns. I think where you have on the other side, a fairly large area that runs from the freeway up to major streets and a couple thousands of people in there, that it's not really linking through something that would look strange on a map. So I think that's the difference in terms of why there's a little bit of more of a concern with the way that appears.
So thank you for those. So I would say then map 3 and map, sorry, my computer won't pull up the PowerPoint, so I had to pull it up on my phone. And map 3A do not sort of look like you're, what did you call it, packing?
So packing is, the idea of combining areas that are not necessarily meant to be together into one area to make sure that the voting strength of a protected class is not existing in other districts where it naturally might. So it's putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will, and that basket's not really big enough to influence the elections, and all your other baskets are less full. Gosh, I keep talking about eggs. I must be hungry. So that's really the idea, is that it's diluting the voting strength in all the other areas, putting it in one, but really it's not really helping much anyway.
So could map 3 and map 2A also be considered packing?
I would say they would be, when you look at 2A, for
Because
example.
that one looks more like it fits.
That one probably, I personally would think that all of them but 3B don't exhibit the characteristics of packing. I think 3B, just because of what it does along the freeway, again, not because it's a bad idea, but just because the way the census blocks are drawn don't allow us to have it look as cohesive as it might be. So, maybe when the census blocks get redrawn and that gets split off and we don't have a large census block that goes all the way up, maybe that looks less bad. But I think because we have to draw it along the freeway, that's where the concerns really start to arise.
So with the 3A, with the portion that goes down to my right into Westlake, that to me looks the same as if you took that part off and put the other one on that map. If you drew the red up in that area, I don't see how those two would be very different.
I think one of the ways that it is a little bit different is when you look at, and again, this is on the district's website, when you look at the concentration of the Latino citizen voting age population, you see it kind of sprinkled around here. So we're combining areas that are together. In some cases, if we were to cut this, cut it off, we're separating areas of Latino influence. Here, we're leapfrogging, if you will, and trying to capture it back in. And I think that's where it becomes a little more problematic, where we're, again, drawing between two communities that are a little bit more far apart in order to make the map work.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I think I'm going to go to Mrs. Goldberg, and then I'm going to go to Mrs. Fitzgerald.
I kind of have a fast question on 3B. That area of Las Casitas over on the left that we've sort of drawn a little, What happens if that just gets absorbed into the purple, the Area 5? Does that...
Well, we're going to have to make some adjustments elsewhere because there's too many folks.
That's what I meant, is how many people...
Off the top of my head, it's going to be thousands. I forget the exact number, but it would require grabbing some other population. So when you look at the difference between 3 and 3B, I believe the difference is that area around Weatherfield and Ladera in the northern part of Area 3. In Scenario 3, that's included within Area 3. So the population is roughly equivalent between that area in the northern part of 3 and the Las Casitas neighborhood. So we'd have to, it basically becomes 3 again. Except for the changes that we made in Area 5 with the increasing the Asian American population.
Just because aesthetically, as you were talking about, the block on the right for Area 2 just looks like it looks natural as opposed to as a boundary, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Again, so if we just going, sorry to keep sliding back and forth. If there's a desire to see a version of 3 or 3B that has some of the features of 3 and some of the features of 3B on different sides of the district, we can certainly bring back that Frankenstein scenario for you to take a look at. It could be a good Frankenstein, I suppose.
Mrs. Fitzgerald, I think you were up next, but while you were making your Frankenstein comment, I saw some head nods up here, and so maybe it would be helpful if the head nodders could explain what it is you're hoping to see. Like, what attracts you about that? Is it the idea that there are similar numbers of campuses in each one of them, or is there something else about the map drawing because we only have one more shot at this, and so if you want a map to come back that makes you nod your head, I think we need to let them know what what is it that makes you like it, not just that you like it. So, Mrs. Fitzgerald, you had your light on, and I didn't call on you, but do you want to go now, or would you?
I would like to say something, but I would like to wait till the end of I don't want to derail this conversation. So, before we move on, at some point after everyone's commented, I have just one quick comment to make.
Mr. Horvath?
Is there any consideration of isolating a part of a protected population? And what I'm asking, without that general vague question, what I'm asking is, if let's go to 3A, I think. I'm mixed up now. No, 3B. Okay. If we take that theoretically connected, which I think is Las Casitas, is that right? Isn't there a consideration that now we're isolating the population of Las Casitas? If we don't have that there, that we're minimizing their power and their say because they're not connected with the fellow protected class, basically in Area 3. I mean, don't we kind of need that there to protect their voice and not isolate them in an area that they won't have as much population?
There's sort of a balancing act that we need to do. As Larry was mentioning, Las Casitas is close to the sort of center of the district, and so this line is kind of drawn to connect it. But if Las Casitas was, say, down here, that would be packing, as Larry mentioned before. So there's a balancing test of, you want to keep communities of interest together, but within reason. So so this map is a little bit of an element to it that just doesn't necessarily maybe look right on the west side of the district. But I understand what you're saying. What you're essentially saying is, if we were to separate this area here from the remainder of the Latino community, would that be hurting them in some way? And it just comes down to sort of where the populations lie, so not necessarily.
It just looks to me like we're isolating them away from the district that's going to be...
If you're going to speak, you need to turn your microphone on.
Sorry. It just looks to me like we're if we don't have that what looks like non-contiguous, if we don't have that, we're isolating them away from the Area 3 where the protected class has the most members, and which takes away their power.
I think if we were looking at this in a situation where putting Las Casitas into Area 3 brought us to 30%, 40%, 52% Latino citizen voting age population in Area 3, then I think there would be a lot stronger of a case and an argument to make for that. But I think because it gets us 1 percentage point higher than some of the other scenarios and diminishes it substantially in all the other areas, that the benefit of it doesn't really outweigh some of the other features of that particular map. And I think, it's important to know, one of the commenters mentioned it is a fairly sizable population, so no matter what area it is in, with thousands of folks, it's going to be a substantial population block in a particular area. So that is something to be considered as well.
I think in most maps, the area that Las Casitas is in does create at least that area is most often at least above the district average CVAP-wise in that area, in addition to Area 3.
So it gets it above that 12% or 11.75%, so it gets to 12, 13 percentage points per percent. So it does increase it a little bit. But again, we also talked about that area being high in population but low in concentration of citizen voting age population. Yeah.
So something that I would like to contribute to this discussion is, first of all, clearly there's no perfect map. And so for me, I think that we have a number of maps to choose from that that definitely concentrate Hispanic, Latino voter voices. And I think that's a good accomplishment, and I think we have a number of maps to choose from that accomplish that goal. So that makes me move on to, in my mind, to other communities of interest and whether I can keep those together. That matters to me. And then the third thing that matters to me is at least an attempt to distribute campuses amongst the areas. I know Westlake, I call it Westlake, the Area 1, the yellow area, we don't have a map that does a lot for that. And that has to do with the geography of the district and when the campuses were built. We can't control everything, no perfect map. But I do like what, those are my three priorities, is that first I would want to see, and I think we have plenty of maps that concentrate and make a difference to the Latino Hispanic voice and the lower income level voice in the center of town. I think that's a good thing. And then the common communities. So that map, which is 3B, in addition to the strange Las Casitas phenomenon, the Area 1 extending all the way out to Dos Vientos and picking up Banyan and then coming across to Westlake Elementary and Westlake Hills. I struggle with that as a community of interest, which is my second priority. And so that's why it's not a map I love. And some of the other maps, somebody pointed out that it placed some of those areas right below the 101 freeway near Moore Park so that they were in the, just looking for that one, I can't remember which one it is. Maybe it is 3A. Yes, it's where there's a little more. That to me is my second priority, and there's a couple of maps that I could live with in that area. That's all I have to say about the maps per se. Although I do have a few questions about the sort of voting and decision-making process, but I'll hold those for now. Do you feel like you have enough input? Is there a plan for what we're going to do between now and next time?
So I guess my first sort of confirmation is, are any or all of the three new maps, the 2A, 3A, 3B, should those be considered under consideration, or which one should be? And then second question is, given some of the feedback tonight, should the demographer attempt to draw maybe one additional map based on the feedback and just put it under consideration so that it can be available for vote at the next meeting?
For me, the three new maps are, I have my favorites, but I think that they should remain under consideration. I think they're an improvement over the maps we had before, although honestly, 3B, it won't get my support. But I can't speak, of course, for anybody else on the board.
And can I just make one more comment? So the one thing that it seems that a lot of the maps really cut Newbury Park up in lots of pieces. Even when you go down Lynn Road, and on some maps you have one side of Lynn Road in one map, one side of Lynn Road in other maps, and that kind of thing. I think, there isn't going to be a perfect scenario, but I would, if you're going to focus on keeping other communities together. Just it needs to be acknowledged that that community is not being kept together in, I don't think, any of the maps because it's too large. But right here in this scenario, you have it in 3 trustee areas. I mean, you have Newbury Park, which attend Newbury Park High School, in a lot of different trustee areas. In fact, you might even have one where you have it in 4 areas. So it's just something to think about.
Anyone else have any input for what happens if we bring, are you hoping we're going to eliminate some of these maps to make the voting process less horrible?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, the board can eliminate maps if it chooses to. I think the direction seems to be put all 6 sort of under consideration. Other than if the board would like to provide direction to maybe add one more. No, the way that it works next week is there'll be a frank discussion similar to tonight of, maybe I like this map or I like that map or I would never vote for this other map. And potentially then someone can make a motion for one of the maps. So that is how it goes next time. And then folks can second and vote or not. That's how it goes next week. There's no, okay, this is the last meeting and we only have one map left. It's not supposed to be that way.
Mrs. Everett?
And just following up on the prior discussion, there could be potentially other maps that would also be added, correct?
Correct. There could potentially be other maps. And we'll make sure that they're released in time to be considered as well.
Any other thoughts before we let our team go?
Yeah.
I have one comment.
Yes.
For this issue, as we move forward and frankly with other issues, I want to respectfully ask the board that we do not insinuate things about individuals who come to comment at our school board meetings. We should have our community members comfortable coming and making statements to the board. There are obviously individuals, even just in this room, who support and do not support certain ideas on this board, and individuals who support and very much do not support board members up here. But I want to make sure that moving forward as a board, that we're providing an environment where people who agree and frankly disagree with us can come and feel as comfortable as possible and not feel like there's going to be comments made with things that don't have a factual basis. So just with this, I know this is a very contentious issue and we're going to deal with more to come. I think that's the best way to move forward.
Mrs. Everett?
Thank you for that. And you haven't been on the board very long, but there will be many times when people come and say things about you that are absolutely false and that will say many things that are not true. And that's the reason why the board has comments, and so that we can give a different side or give a different viewpoint. And the public is watching the meetings, and it is appropriate to correct and to give another viewpoint. If we only want to have one viewpoint given, that's not a very open kind of way to discuss things. But I think that all board members should feel comfortable being able to say things and say, this is what my viewpoint is. And I don't think that the public, when they come to the board meetings, would expect that we would always agree with everything they say about us and to us and about the process. So it is a back and forth. It's meant to be very open, and other board members have always, when someone has said a comment about them, responded. And so that would be an interesting rule to put into place.
The comment that I'm referring to was respectfully not a comment that was made about you. It was a comment that was made to a member here about whether they actually drafted this map or whether it was a friend and they handed it back. That's not a viewpoint. That's making an accusation about someone in our audience for which you don't have facts. And if you do, let's present them in a public forum. But look, there are people that get up here at every meeting and clearly don't like me as a board member and say things that I personally don't agree with. I'm not going to attack them on things that I don't have facts on. There's a difference between giving a viewpoint, which we should encourage, and making kind of like innuendos against community members that are coming to talk. And I don't care how long that's been going on. That has to stop.
We're going to move on. Thank you for the comments. Thank you, gentlemen. We look forward to more maps.